Once again, you're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm your host, Chris Vogel, joined by John Hendricks, who does great work, not only for Boot Crew Media, but for Saints News Network. And this episode of the Straight Up Saints podcast is presented by DraftKings Sportsbook. And with the NFL season about to begin, you can get ready for the week one action with DraftKings Sportsbook because you can celebrate the return of football by betting just $5 on any game that's upcoming, and you get $200 in free bets instantly. All you need to do is download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use promo code BOOT to get $200 in free bets instantly. That's code BOOT only at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. You must be 21 or older to play. Gambling problem? Call 1-877-770-STOP. Now, John, you've had the luxury of being in Green Bay this week. I know you've done some really cool recaps at Lambeau Field and kind of covering the joint practices and how that's been. So before we get into certain topics like Chris Olave and what the defense has been able to do, just overall, if you were to pick one takeaway that really wowed you over the last couple of days in Green Bay, what has that really been?
Well, I think, aside the obvious, the weather's been nice, but, complete opposite of Louisiana. But the big thing I think is the defense has been, is about as legit as you can about imagine, right? And it's not just certain players, it's the whole team. It's the whole team vibing, it's the whole team gelling. Cam Jordan looking dominant. Malcolm Roach starting to come on. The interior looks good. You're starting to get a lot of healthy pieces back. Demario Davis doing his thing, and just how much that he's relied on as far as a leader. Tyrann Mathieu coming along with Marcus May. Still some work to do, but obviously it's moving in the right direction. And Paulson Adebo, Marshawn Lattimore. I mean, this defense, Cam Jordan said it a few weeks ago, said, man, this could really be, they're a defense first team. And I honestly don't disagree there. I think they have the potential to be such a top unit in this league. I think it can carry them a long way. And I think that's been kind of the biggest thing is that, this defense is legitimate. It's real. It's something that's going to carry this team a long way. Without getting too much in spoilers, I picked them to go 11-6. I think they could do better than that based off of how the defense does. Maybe a couple of question marks still here and there, but man, I think that's probably my big takeaway for this week so far.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. I think for the Saints defense, we all kind of have high expectations for that unit, especially after what happened last year. And Dennis Allen gets promoted. You get to keep Chris Richard and Ryan Nielsen as co-defensive coordinators. I'm curious, though. You mentioned it, and being someone who's got boots on the ground in Green Bay, being able to see it up close. When you see this defense against an Aaron Rodgers Packers team that I know they're switching it up a little bit. Devontae Adams is gone, but again, this is Aaron Rodgers. They still have a good running back room, and they did add a couple of young wide receivers like Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs. They also have Samori Toure. So, when you see this defense play the way they played over the last couple of joint practices, how high is the ceiling for this unit? I know you talked about them being defense first, and if they play up to your potential, all of a sudden we start tinkering with the win-loss total. But is it fair for Saints fans to go into this season expecting a top 3 unit? Is that too high? Is that the fair expectation? How high should we set this? And I know there's pressure that comes with it, but is it realistic?
Well, here's what I would say. Definitely top half defense, right? For starters. Definitely think it's top 10 easily. I think getting into that top 5 to 3 ceiling is about right. And, the thing is, here's what I would say, first of all. Continuity from last year that has nothing to do with this year's team, right? And so you can't just say, well, this defense from last year is going to pick up right where they left off. That just doesn't happen because you got so many new faces, a lot of things to worry about and stuff. And so I think the big things are, just saying that I don't know if they'll hit their groove until the midseason. That's probably where I would say I think they're going to be good. But I don't think you'll see that elite level come in and play until it hits mid-season for this team. And I think when you look at it, there's things like the Marcus May potential suspension, 3 games, August 24th is the next hearing. That's in 6 days. Hopefully get a little bit more insight there. That changes things a little bit. PJ Williams would start back there potentially. And so I think that's nothing wrong because PJ's shown that he's done really great in this defense and such. But, look, I think there may be some early struggles. You still haven't had the full effect of Marcus Davenport yet. Still kind of got a few questions. No Pete Werner right now dealing with that groin injury. That's a little bit concerning. So I think early on, I think they can be good, but for them to be great in the lead, I don't think they'll hit that until the midseason part of the year. And once they do, man, I feel like the sky's the limit for them. And really, you want to be playing your best football towards the end of the year because your hopes is in January. Everything's wiped clean. So it doesn't matter if you're 9-8 or 13-4, or 14-3, doesn't matter. Everybody starts 0-0 in the playoffs, and that's what matters is wins in January.
Yeah, and I'm totally okay with that. I think if we look over, the Saints' history, recent history, track record, the defense kind of starts playing their best November, December, and I kind of think of that Bucs shutout last year, right? That second half of the season when they're playing in peak form. So that's a great point there, John. Now, before I get into a wide receiver who you mentioned and talked about in Chris Olave and what he was able to do this week, someone's asking in the comment section, we're bringing it below for people who are listening on the live stream. If you have any questions and you want to submit them, bring them in. John and I will get to them. They want to know how Michael Thomas looked against the Packers defense. Obviously, this was his first opportunity to go against, a player that wasn't suiting up for the Saints because he didn't play in the preseason opener. What'd you think of Michael Thomas and what he was able to do against the Packers?
I don't need to see anything else from Michael Thomas. I've seen everything I need to see from him. He looks outstanding. And the best part is we talked to him yesterday, and he just feels like he's not even there yet, right? But we see him on the field, and he looks reminiscent of the dominant player in 2019. I mean, the guy was doing well against the Packers. I mean, they didn't have one-on-ones or anything like that. And, sometimes catered to the offense a lot of times. But for him, he was getting open, looking like Michael Thomas. I mean, you're talking about working against Jair Alexander, one of the league's best, and just a lot of those different corners that they have. And, look, Michael Thomas is a guy that's really going to change the complexity of this offense, and he's just been missing for the past 2 seasons, right? And so I think the guy is he's in for a killer season. I don't think you'll see 2019 type numbers from him, but man, him saying that says he's not totally there yet is really scary considering how good he's been, how great he's looked for the Saints so far in training camp and, against this week against the Packers defense.
Yeah, and, just hearing that he's trending upward, just music to my ears. And you talked about him not needing to be, not being 2019 level possible of Michael Thomas, which might be the case. And let's be real, 2019 Michael Thomas was just, godly as people thought with the way he played. He doesn't need to be 2019 Michael Thomas. And a big part of that is who they brought in the wide receiver room, bringing in Jarvis Landry, bringing in Chris Olave. And Chris Olave is a player that you've kind of had your eye on through joint practices and what he's been able to do and even playing well against, a top tier cornerback in Jair Alexander. So when you see Chris Olave play the way he's played, this week, is that kind of something that you kind of solidified as, hey, I think this guy is going to be week 1 making a huge impact for the Saints? Or is it just, in your opinion, just another step up the ladder and going that way? Is it a mixture of both? Just what did you see and how are you kind of assessing Chris Olave's growth?
Yeah, I think what comes to mind for me is the first year Brandon Cooks was here. I think that's something that he can make a big impact on the offense. And look, he was somebody that impressed in OTAs, rookie minicamp, mandatory minicamp. Training camp started, really didn't have the great start, but then he started coming on court towards the middle part of camp. And then, we just said, okay, that's what we wanted to see. And then for him to do what he did against the Packers this week in practices, deep bombs to Andy Dalton. You saw everything from him on the route tree, right? And I think that's what you can appreciate. And I think the separation has been huge. That was a huge problem for the Saints wide receivers last year. That's not an issue for him. He's able to slip underneath against a lot of these different coverages and looks. And look, he makes some contested catches. 2 of them were sideline shots. And it was just one of those things where you just see how he's able to move on the field, how he's able to use his hands to get open or just to make those types of contested catches and just really the footwork. So, I mean, it's good to appreciate all 3 facets there. And there's way more that he does there. But look, I think he's in for a really killer season. I won't know if I'd say offensive rookie of the year, but I think he has potential there. But, there's a lot of mouths to feed in this New Orleans offense. And if they get the production they need from Michael Thomas, if they get what they need from Jarvis Landry and then Kamara and Ingram, and then you got Deontay Hardy that stretches the field. And then Adam Troutman's looked really good in training camp. He's done phenomenal. I think he's had one of the best camps of any Saints player right now. And so you get that kind of formula there, then, look, Olave, I think he could flirt with 1,000 yards. I think he could flirt with, well over 6 touchdowns. We'd have to look at what the Vegas odds are. I'm pretty sure most everything when it comes to the Saints are pretty low right now. But, man, he's looked good. He's refreshing to see and watch. And, look for the draft pick that they use on him. I think you're going to see such a monumental return for Chris Olave this season.
Yeah, and with Chris Olave, you mentioned offensive rookie of the year and how that's going to be tough. It definitely is. But I always told people, if they get to the point where you can get somewhat similar to what Devontae Smith was for the Eagles last year and somewhere in that ballpark, that's a heck of a pick. And that would mean that they're inching closer to that playoff status. Now, a question that someone asked, and it's something that I've seen a lot of Saints fans ask actually over the past week, what's going on with Pete Werner? Pete Werner's kind of had a nagging groin injury through training camp. And I guess the concern for something like this is there is no Quan Alexander anymore. And with Pete Werner, some people have asked, did they give hand him the keys to the car too soon? I don't think so. I think Pete Werner's the type of guy that earned it with the way he played last year, and they invested, a day 2 pick in him. That was the right move. But not having that insurance policy behind him, that makes it a little bit more scary. So what's kind of the latest on Pete Werner? I know this is something that people are going to be scared about probably for the rest of the season, because these are those type of injuries, those soft tissue ones that can linger.
Yeah, look, I mean, it is definitely the groin he's dealing with. And the thing is that what's kept him out of practice to start with training camp. And then he comes back. It's a process with Matt Rhea, the way they're working, but obviously it re-aggravated again. That's the hard thing. And hopefully the point, the latest I've heard is that he's still obviously dealing with that. And again, they got to make the choice of, do you try to do this thing where you get him back, then he plays, and then it may re-aggravate, or do you just kind of shut him down and then, let him get what he needs to get done and then bring him back for the season? I think that's the big question mark. And so no recent updates there, but here what I'd say too is that, Dennis Allen felt really good about Pete Werner, right? And he said it the other day in his press conference. He feels great about, obviously, Damari Davis, who doesn't? And then he singled out Caden Ellis, which I thought was pretty interesting. And so outside of that, the competition is wide open. Eric Wilson is a guy who's looked really good. I know Chase Hansen had the great game against the Texans, but he got banged up and he didn't practice yesterday. And so that was a little bit tough for him. He needs the reps. He needs the snaps. But I think Eric Wilson would probably be that guy in day one. He's a veteran in this league. He's had triple-digit tackles. I think he's somebody who's obviously not Quan. He's not Pete Werner, but I think he brings a lot of good skill sets to this team. And, look, he had that big pass breakup on that interception that Chase Hansen got against the Texans. And so, look, it's a lot to still figure out here. I definitely feel a little bit more concerned about Pete Werner there. I know it's this is why you should sign Quan. And there was a chance to do that. And he obviously chose the Jets and such. And, you just hope that doesn't have a lingering issue. But I think that's the only question mark I have on this defense right now is who's that guy against DeMario? And that's the only concern I have on this defense.
Yeah, and that's a really fair concern. I think for a Saints defense that's loaded, it might get to the point where people start talking about, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And I think if Pete Werner's healthy, I don't know who the weak link really would be on this Saints defense. Whereas if he's not there, that at least causes an opening, and maybe that, could maybe cause issues for this unit, but we'll see. It's too early to kind of speculate there. Another question that people want to know, I believe they're talking about Landon Young here, if he's going to play tomorrow, and what's kind of the offensive line situation, which kind of segues, and I'll kind of jumble it in with a topic that we were going to bring up anyway, and we'll put it all together, is with Hurst kind of, dealing with an injury right now, although it's not supposed to be severe, but we'll see how that kind of progresses. This might be the preseason game where we get to see a lot of that young talent. Maybe Landon Young, maybe Trevor Penning, who looked good as a run blocker, but obviously there were some snaps that just didn't go his way in pass rushing situations against the Texans. So whether it's Landon Young, Trevor Penning, Lewis Kidd, what are you kind of expecting from the young offensive lineman? Is this kind of dress rehearsal where, hey, you might be competing or auditioning for a potential starting job down the road? What is this kind of game going to lead for them to?
Yeah, look, Landon Young didn't practice yesterday, and obviously he got a little banged up and left practice early Tuesday. So I'd be surprised if we see him a little bit. And, yesterday was a nightmare. So you had Trevor Penning get hurt. Obviously he came back and he ended up playing. So that was the good news. James Hurst left, foot injury. He was playing right tackle because they didn't have Ryan Ramczyk as it is. And Andres Pete wasn't playing in practice or participating in practice yesterday. So, I mean, it's a pretty big nightmare. And then Sage Doxtator was playing left tackle. He gets hurt. Forearm injury or arm injury. Now he's waived injured. And so they brought in Derek Kelly, claimed him off waivers from the Jets. Derek Schweiger is a guy that was with them, signed as an undrafted rookie free agent. So he's probably more of an interior guy. So look, it's going to be interesting. And you didn't have Forrest Lamp in there either the other day. So it's like this offensive line got really depleted really fast. And so, look, Lewis Kidd is a guy. I mean, he was my dark horse to make the roster. I think this is a great opportunity for him, just from where he's at. And, maybe it doesn't work out for him, but he's going to get a lot of snaps in this one. I'm not sure about Landon Young. Haven't heard too much on him. Again, he was out at practice, so that's a good sign. But, guys that weren't practicing yesterday, Dwayne Washington, who got banged up, he's one that, we'll see if he plays. And the same thing with Landon Young. But, great opportunity for a guy like Lewis Kidd to come in here. He's played more, of a right tackle spot. But man, you've gone from, this has always been a concern. And I think with the Saints offensive line, it's a matter of if, it's a matter of when. You're going to lose some of these key pieces to the offensive line. And so you got to have a solid depth plan. And I feel a little bit better about where they are because they have Calvin Throckmorton, started 14 games last season at left guard. He's got work at left guard and right guard. So I think we'll see a little bit more of him. But, look, I don't think we'll see a ton of starters this week against the Texans, but that is an area that they have to get figured out because, look, I know a lot of people are knocking Ian Book, and he's had a tough go. Let's just face it and call it for what it is. But, that offensive line also hasn't been giving him a lot of opportunities too. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. But, great opportunity for Lewis Kidd. We'll see on Landon Young, and we'll know really quickly if he's going to play or not.
Yeah, and for anyone, if you're sitting there and you're going, did John really say Lewis Kidd's his dark horse? We actually, I don't know if it was May or June, we were talking about it. I'm like, who's kind of a dark horse for you? And you were on the Lewis Kidd bandwagon from all the way then. So definitely a great opportunity for him. And you talked about needing depth. We saw it last year, right? We went into last year talking about how the offensive line would be the strength of the 2021 New Orleans Saints, and every starting offensive lineman except for Cesar Ruiz missed a bunch of games. So it's definitely a position that you need to have depth, and these guys are going to go down. It's such a violent sport when you're in the trenches. So we'll see what happens there. You mentioned Dwayne Washington. I kind of want to talk about the running backs briefly. That's going to be such a big factor, I think, for this preseason game, the final preseason game. Running backs, they get such a good opportunity in preseason games to kind of showcase their skill set. And I thought last week, Washington came out and played well. Abram Smith, if he doesn't put the ball down on the ground, we're probably talking about him looking really explosive. So that's going to be a concern for him and something he has to shore up for the next two games and next couple of weeks of practice. And, Ozigbo was fine. Tony Jones Jr. was, playing well. And this is a guy who we saw shine last preseason as well. For you going into, let's say, Friday's game and just kind of moving forward, one, do you feel like there's an early lean for the number 3 running back on the depth chart? And two, who's kind of the guy that you'd say is maybe under the most pressure? Because I look at this and I'm like, if Abram Smith can replicate last week's performance and not put the ball on the ground, he might edge maybe a little bit closer. But I'm curious where it kind of stands for you, John.
Yeah, I think coming into camp, I think Ozigbo was the guy that had the early lead, but Tony Jones Jr. was having a tough start to camp, but man, he came on in a big way and kind of reminded everybody this is why he beat out Latavius Murray last year and Devontae Freeman. I think he's probably got a slight edge on the competition right now. Dwayne Washington has looked really good, and many people forget he's been with this team for a while. He's been in the league since 2016, and so he knows what's expected, right? And so I think when you look at it, Tony Jones Jr. has probably got the leg up here. I think the most pressure is on Abram Smith. I thought he was a guy that could crack the roster, undrafted rookie. They didn't really have anybody last year that cracked it, but I don't know if we'll have anybody this year. It just, not that Smith hasn't looked good, but, just when it comes down to it, you see the special teams upside for Tony Jones Jr. and Dwayne Washington. Ozigbo's a guy that, man, may be the odd man out. And obviously it depends how they tackle the roster because, are you going to keep Adam Prentice on the final roster when you put the 53 together, or do you think you can release him and just bring him back on the practice squad like they did Alex Armour last year and then just call him up? And then do you keep 4 running backs or is it 3? I think those are going to be the interesting roster cuts that you see. But if you had to ask me now, I think it's got to be Tony Jones Jr. who's going to make the roster. I think Dwayne Washington needs to play. I don't know if he's going to, but it's going to be important for him to get those snaps. And obviously injuries are never a good thing, but right now I think Tony Jones Jr. would be the guy that I would lean to. And then, it's kind of up for grabs there, but I think Abram Smith has a lot of practice squad potential. I think Dwayne Washington and Ozigbo can go back on the actual practice squad too, just depending on how they shape out that 16-man roster there on the practice squad. But, that's what I would think is it looks like Alvin Kamara may not have to worry about any discipline. So that becomes less of a worry. But then again, Mark Ingram. I know he feels great. I know he looks great. He looks really good out there. Had a big old burst yesterday that would have resulted in a touchdown. But look, I think that they have a pretty solid plan here, and maybe they still look at upgrading that area.
Yeah, and I think with Tony Jones Jr., I think it'd be a pretty cool story for a guy who was, I would say, dominant in the preseason last year, kind of show what he could do. Didn't get the chance in the regular season, didn't really, come to fruition, but we'll see there. And you mentioned the special teams upside. I think that's crucial when you get to keep Kamara and you hope that Ingram has pop left. If you could get some usage out of your running back 3 and special teams, that's definitely an added plus. So we'll see what happens there. And as always, someone that's going to be talked about, whether he's on the field, off the field, whatever it is, because he does play the most important position in the game. What's the deal with Jameis Winston? I know that we won't be seeing him tomorrow, but is he at least trending in the right direction? I know you got to put out some video clips of him running at practice, him kind of doing some things with his teammates. I thought personally, just from the videos you shared, he looked like he was getting better, but what's kind of the latest on Jameis?
Yeah, look, so I know they're being cautious because that's obviously a little bit of a concern seeing that foot, but, just give you a snapshot of yesterday. He was there. He was in padded practice and, doing team walkthroughs. He was going through the drills there, and he was sprinting. He was doing a lot of things, but he's not going to play in the preseason. I'd be surprised if we see him at any preseason game, right? Just because lots riding on Jameis this season. They're expecting a lot from him, but it's encouraging to see him running. And Dennis Allen yesterday said, doesn't have an actual report on where he is at in his progress, but again, everything that we've seen, just this whole trending upward, and guys that have been working through soft tissue injuries or whatever it might be, like Marshawn Lattimore or any of these guys, there is a smart, cautious period that the Saints have been doing. And I think that's a huge attribute to what Matt Rhea has been bringing to the table. And so, look, Jameis will be okay, but obviously you're not going to see him against Packers. Didn't take any snaps, team drills. That was all Andy Dalton and Ian Book. So, look, I think by the time week 1 rolls around, he's going to be perfectly fine, but they need to keep the bubble wrap on him a little bit and make sure he doesn't get hurt or dinged up before the season gets here.
And you mentioned, Andy Dalton kind of running things right now. I talked about it earlier this week, and I tried so hard to carefully word it before people were like, hey, wait, do you really feel that way? But I kind of feel like with a position like quarterback that's so important, depending on how this season plays out, we might look back at the Andy Dalton signing and be like, man, that might have been their most important signing, not acquisition, because Chris Olave can just blow the door open. Jarvis Landry and Tyrann Mathieu, Marcus May, don't get me wrong, they're big impact players, but you've seen Andy Dalton so far up close. I thought he looked pretty good in the Texans game, kind of kept the offense on schedule. In the event, let's say Jameis did miss time, seeing Andy Dalton, how comfortable would you feel with him? Let's say it's a 2-game stint that he has to kind of run this offense.
I'd feel comfortable with it. I think he's a great veteran that's been around, and you had him last year. I mean, there's so many things. You had him last year on any of the games Saints are in the playoffs, right? It's just kind of how it goes. And, look, I feel comfortable, more than comfortable with Andy Dalton here. And obviously I want to see Jameis go a 17-game season. I want to see what he can do. Just a lot's riding on that. Look, he's got that 2019 narrative he needs to shed, and that's why I want to see him go a full season, because everybody knocks him as a 30 for 30 guy. But look, if they get in a pinch, I think Andy Dalton's real comfortable leading this offense. I think he's somebody that's, obviously bounced around a couple of different programs, but he's got a great support cast. I think he's got the best support cast he's had around any of his teams that he's been as a backup role, or even having to go in as a starter role. And so, look, part of that's getting Mike Thomas. Part of that's Jarvis Landry. Part of that's, Olave and other guys, right? And so I know Dalton has the confidence to do things. And, look, I would hate to see Jameis go down at any point in the season, but Dalton's going to be ready. He's going to be one of those guys that I think you look at him and can throw really well. He still has legs. He's got the arm. And so I'm not worried about that at all.
Yeah. And again, we're all on the same team here in the sense that we need and want to see Jameis Winston for 17 games. We're all looking kind of for closure in the sense of what's the full picture of him in Pete Carmichael's offense. And when you go 5-2 with him under center last year, you want a little bit more of those results and see what happens in a full, game schedule. The last thing I want to talk about before we kind of wrap things up, because for people who don't know, we're going to have another, show tomorrow and talk about what's going on with this Saints-Packers game. The tight end room, is there a bona fide star like a George Kittle or Travis Kelce? Obviously not. But I think this is a position group that, whether it's Troutman improving, Taysom kind of getting added to the group, Lucas Kroll, when healthy and on the field, making some splash plays from here and there, Juwan Johnson taking that next step. It's one of those rooms where it doesn't maybe kind of stand out when you're looking at the box score, but I think it actually has improved. And as we go into the second preseason game, what's kind of been your takeaways on the tight end room, and who's maybe impressed you so far the most out of the bunch?
Yeah, look, and let me start off by saying, because I know we got one of these questions on Twitter about Lucas Kroll. He had a really good day of practice, the other day, and so that was good to see. He took got a deep pass over the middle, got hit immediately, and tailed onto the ball. He needed that. He later had another one from Book that looked really good, and so I don't think he's done enough to make this roster. I know practice squad priority would be where I would say that, but right now the pecking order would be Adam Troutman, who's looked great in this camp. And, last year he was just kind of around. There was nothing that was flashy about it. So that was probably our telltale warning sign. So I think this year we could see the breakout that we thought he was going to have in his second year. And then obviously Taysom Hill is going to be there with tight ends. He's going to do multiple roles. And then I think it's Juwan Johnson is the other guy. And so he's bulked up. I think he's a guy that's really sneaky. We saw his value in the red zone last year early on, and he's kind of fizzled out because of play calling scheme. And, which kind of leaves Nick Vannett as the odd man out. And I don't think that should really surprise anyone. He battled a lot of injuries last year and just hasn't been able to really find a solid groove. And so, those things happen. But right now I'd say they keep the three tight ends. I think there's reason to be optimistic about it. This is a very young group, very young and inexperienced group, but they're rallying around each other. And I think there's a chance for it to be good. I don't know if, again, like you said, it's not George Kittle, Travis Kelce. I think if you put, no disrespect, but if you put all those tight ends together, you still don't have a Mark Andrews, Kittle, or a Kelce, right? And, they don't need to be those guys. They don't have to be Jimmy Graham. They just need to be maybe Ben Watson good, right? And that's the success that you need from the tight end group right now. And, look, it's going to be interesting to see how they do the target share, how they're going to do reps. But I think there's a good reason to be optimistic here. But it's one of those that you want to see it all together and see how it works. And so week one's going to be a good opportunity to see a lot of that. And, I feel like we can get some of those answers pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you talked about how they don't even need to be that, because I think of a Bills team last year. You're spreading the ball around Stephon Diggs, Gabriel Davis, Cole Beasley, Emmanuel Sanders. What happens? Dawson Knox ends up turning into a star. And one of them might not even turn into a Dawson Knox, but if the group together collectively can put together that production, and they probably won't be high up on a defensive coordinator's checklist when you're trying to stop so many assets that the Saints have on offense, it could be an opportunity for them to shine. Now, real quick, John, this is a quick question someone has about Marcus Davenport before we wrap it up. How's he kind of looked? I know Davenport's a hot topic in the Saints world. What have you kind of seen from him?
Yeah, look, so he's been thrown on pads past couple of days, and then he goes kind of like street clothes. So kind of there for walkthroughs and stuff. It doesn't seem like he's completely ready yet. So, but he's on the right path, right? And so you got to remember he had off-season shoulder surgery, and then obviously the pinky issue. That was a big one too. But look, I know he's going to be ready. And the good thing is they got a very deep pass rushing class. But look, I'm going to tell you, it doesn't account necessarily. It doesn't replace just having Marcus Davenport on the field. He's a guy that's just a menace. He's a huge reason why Cam Jordan gets a lot of help or gets a lot of sacks and such, and same thing with the interior defensive line. And so they need him to be 100%, but we really haven't seen him in the team drills necessarily, the individual side stuff, but I think it's coming. We still got some time to wait here. I mean, season's about 24 days away, 25 days away, something like that. So I think he'll be good by week one, but all signs are pointing to the encouragement side, not to be okay if this guy wasn't around, but he's been around every day at the facility. We see him every day after practice or during practice. And so that's the most encouraging things, that he's not somebody that's just not there and missing.
Yeah, and Davenport, it always used to be a thing back then where people were like, is he going to be healthy? And then if he's healthy, does he produce? It's a matter of if he's on the field, he's going to do his thing. We saw last year just how good he could be for this Saints defensive line. So that's going to do it for this edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. It was a pleasure having John on as always to kind of, recap and preview what's to come. For Saints fans who don't know yet, we are going to do a preview show, time to be determined. We will announce that before the Saints play the Packers in their second preseason game. And obviously you can follow John for, live updates of the game and maybe even futuristic updates. For people who don't know, John is the fastest typer in the game. So he will definitely give you the play-by-play as it happens. So thank you so much, John, for hopping on. And for everyone listening, thank you for the comments. We'll be back on Friday for more coverage here on Boot Crew Media.